Boyfriend can't win a single game, fails at basic tasks, and I'm left questioning my own sanity in our relationship. Basically, my boyfriend, let's call him Steve, is just not good at doing anything. Well, that's not exactly true. He's actually great at outdoorsy stuff, and apparently he's pretty good at his job in catering. But aside from that, I honestly have to wonder. For example, I feel like I can't do anything with him that involves any skill or is even slightly competitive, because, 1, he's a sore loser, and 2, he never wins. I remember when I stayed with his family over Christmas, and they had a Scrabble board. Since it was snowy and boring outside, of course I tried to pass the time playing Scrabble with him. It's not like I'm some champion Scrabble player, but I still crushed him every single game. After a few rounds, I just couldn't play anymore, because I had to spend 10 minutes after each game making him feel better about himself. After giving up on Scrabble, we switched to playing Sorry. We had to stop that too, because I just couldn't handle the emotional work of continuously beating him, even at Sorry. There was another night when we went to a board game night with friends. He couldn't understand the rules for most of the games, and afterward he vented to me about how stupid the games were and how there was no point having rules so complicated. The thing is, he was the only one who couldn't grasp the rules. Other times, we'd try to do fun, casual stuff like air hockey or foosball, which I really didn't think required any strategy other than spinning the little plastic guys really fast. Yet he'd still lose every single time and get upset about it. I honestly don't care about winning, I just want to have fun. But it feels impossible when playing anything with him is like playing against a 5-year-old. But this isn't just about how my boyfriend is terrible at games. There's more. His internet stopped working a while back, so he called me for help. I told him to use his mobile data and download the troubleshooting manual for his router, maybe see if he could fix it. He didn't manage. When I got to his place later, I found out he'd downloaded the manual for the wrong router. It wasn't even the right brand. I ended up fixing the problem for him, and then he went on a rant about how all the router manufacturers make their manuals deliberately hard to understand, almost like there's some conspiracy to keep everyone in perpetual confusion unless you're a genius. But I'm not a genius, I'm just capable of following basic written instructions. Also, he wants to go back to school for a master's degree, but he needs to do some prerequisites, including a math unit that he's struggling with. As far as I can tell, it's all material he learned in high school. Lately, he's been posting Facebook updates about how hard it is to learn logarithms. My school covered logarithms in grade 9, and even though I can't remember how to do them off the top of my head, I don't recall them being that hard. And honestly, I'm just getting so tired of being expected to be sympathetic every time he hits a small bump. At this point, I want to yell, well, maybe if you weren't such a dumbass. But if I even hint that he should be able to handle his own emotions, like, honey, I know you couldn't get the pizza dough the shape you wanted, but it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things, right? Suddenly I'm accused of being unsympathetic. What about my feelings? I don't want to provide constant rolling coverage of every tiny thing that bothers him. And yet, he's also such a sweet, hard-working guy who treats me really well. His boss and coworkers say not only does he work hard, but he's actually super competent at his job. He did pretty well in high school. He's lived on his own since he was 16 and managed to keep himself alive the whole time. No one else has ever said, or even hinted, to me, gee, your boyfriend's kind of a dumbass. So what's wrong here? Is it me? Am I the crazy one? Am I just a bitch? Update 1. I'm going to ramble for a bit, but that's honestly the only way I can untangle all the madness in my head, so here goes. Some background: my ex graduated with a degree in biomedicine last year, but as far as I know, he never actually tried to find work in his field. At first, I didn't see this as an issue. He always seemed self-sufficient, and he never appeared that interested in his degree anyway. I mean, who was I to judge? I spent several years after high school bouncing between odd jobs just to figure out my path, and here I am now, most of the way through nursing school. But over time, this uneasiness crept in. He would talk endlessly about wanting a PhD and planning to become a professor, a goal even the most brilliant students struggle to achieve. I didn't know how to say, hey, you might be setting yourself up for major disappointment, without crushing his spirit. So, he decided to go back for his master's degree. Fine, whatever. Then came the day I realized I had never really spoken to him about his persistent negativity while we were both calm. One day, I sat him down. I told him, gently but firmly, that while I'd always support him in real moments of distress, I couldn't handle the constant, non-stop complaining about his coworkers, my housemates, his housemates, losing at games, the train system, math, and especially arts majors. According to him, they all work at Starbucks, and the one time I pointed out the irony, he went eerily quiet and later told me I'd really hurt him, that I should never strike such low blows. In hindsight, what a massive red flag. I explained that the never-ending crises exhausted me, and suggested, since he's had depression on and off, that maybe he could benefit from seeing a therapist. That idea went over like a lead balloon. He immediately accused me of not caring about his feelings, said he should be free to vent to me as much as he wanted, and ranted that all psychologists care about is giving people happy pills to make them like everyone else. I calmly pointed out that psychologists don't actually prescribe medications, but he just fell silent for a while and then spat out, Doesn't matter, they're still all about convincing you it's okay to be a loser. I dared to ask if he thought he was a loser. He said no, but insisted that it's important to be constantly aware of your flaws and punish yourself when you mess up. That, apparently, was the reason for all his obsessive running. At that point, I ended the conversation because I had no idea what to say to that. Another thing eating at me was that he was currently taking prerequisites, math and sciences, so he could start his master's. I found it odd since he supposedly already had a degree in biomedicine. I know he graduated, there's a photo of him in his gown on Facebook, but any time I asked about it, he brushed it off, almost like he had something to hide. Of all the issues, this was the one that really made me feel like maybe I was imagining things. Maybe there was a perfectly logical explanation. But if so, why the evasiveness? Looking back at the whole mess is bizarre. So much craziness. Was it really that bad? Maybe it was. After that disastrous conversation, I felt stupid for not realizing the relationship was doomed from the start, but I couldn't bring myself to actually break up with him. That is, until the boat ride. In my town, you can rent these little sailboats and float around for an hour or so, perfect summer date, or so I thought. We'd already planned this before our horrible conversation, and I was clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, I could fix things. Well, we set sail, and for about 10 minutes, everything was fine. Then we had to turn the boat. Of course, if you've never sailed before, turning is the trickiest part. I could see him getting more and more tense. I tried to lighten the mood by joking about our struggle, and he snapped back with, "Oh sure, it's fine to be shitty at things. Who needs standards?" And I should have known I'd suck at sailing. I tried to reassure him that it didn't matter if we weren't good at it, this was supposed to be fun. I'd said it a dozen times before, and he was clearly sick of hearing it as I was of saying it. That was all it took to trigger one of his notorious rants, how he couldn't do anything right, people who are okay with mediocrity are idiots. I just wanted him to be happy as a dumbass. Everything is dumb, sailboats are dumb, the boat is dumb, our town is too windy, and on and on. After that, he went completely silent except to snap at me every time I asked him for help with the ropes. And that was the moment, sitting on that little sailboat with the wind whipping around us, with someone who couldn't even enjoy failing at something silly, that I finally knew I couldn't do this anymore. Update 2. I did it on the dock because there was no point pretending we could smooth it over with a hot chocolate later. He tied us up badly, 3 messy knots he yanked tight like he was trying to punish the rope, and I just said it. I told him I couldn't keep carrying the weight of his feelings around like a second backpack and that I didn't see a path back from the way he talks to me when he's spiraling. He went quiet in that dangerous way, then said, "So you finally admit you want a loser," which made me laugh, actually laugh, because I was so tired I had nothing else left. He took the laugh like a slap. I told him it wasn't about winning or losing anything. It was about me not wanting to be collateral damage to his standards. And then I walked home with my hair still wet from the spray and felt lightheaded the whole way, like I'd been fasting for a week without noticing. 2 days later, we did the exchange of hostages. I brought his gray hoodie and the camping headlamp he loves. He handed me back my Tupperware, none of it matched its lids anymore, of course, and the houseplant that has somehow survived his kitchen windowsill. He was brittle nice, all sharp edges tucked under a towel. I kept my voice calm and boring on purpose. I was in and out in under 10 minutes, except on my way out I noticed a receipt peeking out of a book on the shoe rack. Down higher, 2 hours, last November, for the exact day I'd congratulated him on Facebook for graduating. I didn't touch it, but it burned through me all afternoon like a cup of bad coffee. By the time I got home, a little scrap of my dignity had apparently crawled back because I texted him, straight up, and said, "Did you actually graduate?" He took an hour to reply and sent, "It's complicated." Complicated turned out to be that he never finished. Not a credit short, not a paperwork mix-up. He bombed his final year research unit, then missed the resit because he was working 2 weddings back to back and said he couldn't get the time off. Then he didn't answer any emails, because answering emails makes him feel trapped, and the next time he showed up on campus it was to meet his friends for photos in their gowns. He rented one so his grandma wouldn't be disappointed, and then he never corrected the story because, according to him, what's a degree but a piece of paper when you already know the content? I stared at my phone and felt my face get hot in that slow, ugly way. He went on about how it wasn't lying because he always intended to go back and finish, so the future truth covered the present. I told him there isn't a lay-by option on reality. I should have left it at that, but the world apparently wanted an encore. The morning after, between a pharmacology lecture and my clinical shift, I got a polite, apologetic email from an admissions officer at the uni he's applying to for the masters. They were just following up to confirm a few details in your reference, and could I please call my reference? I have never written a reference for anyone in my life. I rang from an empty staircase and the woman read me lines back in a too kind voice about his exceptional resilience, grit in the face of systemic obstacles, and probity. My name was neatly typed under a fake title I do not have, with a logo from my nursing school that I definitely do not control. He had attached a smiling headshot of me I recognized from a party. I felt like I'd fallen through a trapdoor into a room where all the furniture looks normal until you try to sit on it. I told her I didn't write it. She was very calm and said they take integrity seriously and thanked me for clarifying. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking so hard I dropped my water bottle. He texted me 10 minutes later. Of course he did. Something that started with, "Hey, quick question," like he hadn't just tried to puppeteer my name and face. He said he figured a reference from me would mean a lot because I knew him best, and he used the phrase "white lie" again, like that could cover an entire counterfeit letterhead. He wrote that if I cared about his future, I wouldn't let bureaucracy choke it to death. I sat on the stairs with my head against the cinderblock wall and felt the weirdest sense of déjà vu, like I'd already had this argument with him 100 times in different clothes. It didn't stop there. His boss called me that afternoon because I'm still in his phone as emergency contact, something I'd meant to change and hadn't, and told me he'd walked out midway through plating entrees after getting an email from admissions and was now on a run with no phone. I said I wasn't his partner anymore and couldn't go chase him down. 20 minutes later, he turned up at my place sweaty and furious and already talking, like if he could keep the words moving he could keep me there. He said I didn't understand how hard he worked. He said everyone fakes it to get through the door and then proves themselves later. He said the letter was basically true. He said I'd ruined everything by siding with them. Then he cried, and then he stopped crying and stared at my bookshelf like it had personally offended him, and then he said, flatly, "Just tell me what to do to make you respect me." I told him the answer was therapy and honesty and time, probably a lot of it, and also not using my name to varnish his stories. He said therapy is for people who want a permission slip to be average. I opened the door. He didn't leave. I stood there, holding the handle like it was a life raft, and said, as gently as I could, that I wasn't coming back from this. He walked out then like he'd been pushed. I slept for 12 hours that night and woke up to a text from his mother asking if I'd heard from him, which is how I ended up sitting in her kitchen 2 days later with a cup of tea and the kind of floral curtains you only get from a proper hard-wearing fabric shop. She didn't yell, which somehow was worse. She told me she knew about the not graduating. She found out when she tried to book him a celebratory dinner and called the university to check the ceremony time. He'd sobbed in their garage next to a rack of garden tools and promised he'd fix it before anyone else noticed. She'd believed him because she wanted to. She thanked me for telling the admissions office the truth and for not letting him move the line one more inch. Then she said, very softly, that she was sorry, and slid my spare key to his place across the table to me. He messaged me a final time that evening. It was 3 sentences. He said he was going to finish the degree properly. He said he'd removed me as his emergency contact. He said he didn't forgive me. I put my phone on the counter and made pasta and ate it standing up over the sink, and for the first time in months the food tasted like food instead of like a test I had to pass. The plant from his kitchen windowsill is on my desk now, leaning into the light like it's been waiting this whole time. I watered it yesterday and, without thinking, told it it's doing great. I heard myself say it and laughed, and then I cried a bit, which felt stupid and also fine. I think I'm done grading someone else's paper. Update 3. It turns out you can think you've closed a door and then find out the hinges were still warm. 3 days after I told his mother I was out, my placement coordinator forwarded me an email from our school's legal office with my name sitting there politely in the first line, which is a special kind of nausea. They'd been contacted by the university he applied to about a reference on nursing school letterhead, and could I confirm whether I had authorized use of the logo. I was in the staff bathroom with my scrubs half untied, staring at myself under the kind of light that makes even your bones look tired, and typing back one-fingered, "No, I did not authorize that, and also no, I did not write it." The reply was brisk and kind. They were issuing a takedown and sending him a letter with words like misrepresentation and passing off, and I felt like a kid who'd finally told a teacher someone kept stealing her pencils. I told myself that was the end of it. The universe laughed and put him in a hairnet. Halfway through evening meds on ortho, the catering trolley came clacking down the corridor and it was him behind it, red in the face and trying too hard not to make eye contact. He saw me and the words jumped up on his tongue like they'd been waiting there. Can we, he started, and my charge nurse just materialized at my shoulder like an experienced bouncer in memory foam clogs and said, without raising her voice, "Not here." He tried again, eyes wet, saying my name like an answer key. I stepped behind the nurse's station glass and felt the safety of the little half-wall like body armor. He said, hurriedly, "I only use the letter because they don't read anything if it isn't official," which is such a perfect thesis statement for his life I almost wrote it down. The bay call bell screamed. The lift arrived. My charge nurse put a hand on the trolley and gently turned it around as if she was showing him an exit he'd missed. As the doors closed, he blurted, "I put you down as a referee for a rental, just say I'm reliable," like a teenager asking you to sign his diary. The doors kissed and shut and I caught my own reflection frowning back at me in the stainless steel. I got home and there was an A4 envelope under my door with my name printed on it in block letters like I was a suspect. Inside, a fresh reference, the same text as before except where he'd replaced partner with ex-partner in 3 places, like that made it ethical, and a USB in a Ziploc bag with a sticky note that said evidence. I looked at the USB the way you look at a suspicious mushroom and put it, unopened, in a second Ziploc with a date and time scrawled on top because, apparently I am now the kind of person who learns about chain of custody from cop shows. I texted his mother, "He's leaving things at my place, please tell him to stop." She called me instead and said she was so sorry and that she'd take his spare key off him. I told her he somehow still had one. There was a tiny pause and then she said, very quietly, "He copies keys." He did it with the garage. Of course he does. The next morning, admin from old uni rang me and used my full name and explained, in that voice institutions use when they're trying not to scare you, that they were conducting an integrity review into his application materials and needed to confirm a timeline. I took the call in the hospital courtyard where the jacaranda confetti is still glued to the pavers from last week's rain. I kept it boring and factual. They thanked me and said they'd be in touch if they needed anything else. I hung up and my hands were still doing that tremble you can't order to stop, and a woman from palliative who I barely know just passed me a sealed biscuit packet from her pocket and said, "Sugar helps," which I accepted with the reverence of a sacrament. At lunch, I checked my email and found his version of a legal letter waiting for me. Subject line, "Without prejudice." Body, every third word hereby. He accused me of defaming him by contacting various bodies, and warned me of consequences. He had copied and pasted a paragraph from a cease and desist template and left in the part where it says insert date. I snorted so loudly the nurse at the next computer flinched. I forwarded it to the actual legal office with a short note and then, because I am trying to be the kind of adult who doesn't leave landmines for herself, I wrote him a final, 2-sentence message. Do not use my name, my image, or my institution's logo for anything. Do not contact me again except through a lawyer. Then I blocked his number and set my phone down like it was warm from a pocket it didn't belong in. I thought the rental thing was a throwaway until a man called from a property management company and asked me to confirm that Stefan was an excellent housemate who contributes to chores in a timely manner. He read that line like he was quoting scripture. I told him I could not provide a reference and that my name was being used without consent. He apologized, awkward little cough, and said he'd make a note. In the background I could hear the printer cheering away, spitting out someone else's lives. That night, a message request pinged my Instagram. A girl with a profile picture of a bike helmet and a fringe said, "Hi, sorry to bother you, do you know Steve?" And my stomach did a small, annoyed roll. She'd met him at a run club last month. He'd asked her to do him a tiny favor and pose as a lab supervisor on a call because his old one was traveling with no reception, and when she said she didn't feel comfortable, he'd sent her a draft script anyway to make it easy. She'd Googled me after seeing my name on a template in the draft file info because he is exactly that careless. I told her I was no longer involved and that if anyone called she was free to tell the truth. She sent back a string of thanks with a flat little humor to them and I realized, not for the first time, that I am not the main character in his story, I'm just the nearest available prop table. By Thursday, I'd convinced myself he'd gotten the message. Friday morning, I came down to find my front door looking perfectly normal until you looked closely and realized the lock cylinder had a faint new gouge around it, a soft brassy crescent like a fingernail mark. My landlord lives 2 doors down and came over with a tool bag that looks older than me. He peered, hummed, and then, in the way of men who've been fixing things longer than I've been alive, replaced the whole lock in under 15 minutes and refused my attempt at a bank transfer. "Get yourself one of those cheap stick-on cameras," he said, patting the door jamb. I did. I stuck a little eye over my doorway and watched its single red LED blink back at me like a tiny heartbeat. I should say, somewhere in the middle of this, something normal happened. I lost 3 hands of gin rummy to my housemate on the kitchen table with a tea towel as a tablecloth, and it was stupid and cozy and we invented a rule about having to say gin in a pretend 1940s accent and I realized my shoulders had relaxed without permission. The plant on my desk did a ridiculous little new leaf unfurl like a flag at half-mast that just decided to go the whole way up. Today, a final thing, an envelope with a university crest arrived addressed to me. I opened it at the sink because apparently that's where I process all my emotions now. It was a copy of a formal notice to him, CC'd to me because I'm referenced in the case file, laying out the findings of their preliminary review, misrepresentation in application materials, unauthorized use of institutional marks, contacting a prospective referee under false pretenses. It was written in that arid, careful language that never uses an adjective unless it absolutely must. At the end, in a tone so calm it felt almost like mercy, it invited him to submit an explanation within 14 days. I stood there reading and felt, not triumphant, not vindicated, just a deep, clean emptiness where the buzzing used to be, like someone had finally shut off a fluorescent light I'd forgotten was stuck on. He hasn't knocked since the lock got changed. The camera shows me neighbors with takeaway and a cat who thinks the stairwell is his kingdom. My phone is quiet. I repotted the plant into something less ugly and when I tipped it out I found its roots wrapped around a smooth pebble like it had kept hold of a secret. I rinsed the dirt off and kept the pebble on my windowsill because it makes me laugh to have something that uncomplicated to look after. If there's a moral here, it's probably just that I am not an alibi. I am not a letterhead. I am not a door you can open with any key you happen to have. I'm busy learning the dosage charts and how to tie a sling the way that actually helps and how to lose at cards without apologizing. The rest, his essays, his scripts, his 14 days, belong to him. Update 4. The first sign the universe hadn't gone home early was my phone vibrating at 7:11 a.m. from a number that looked like a locker combination. I answered with a mouth full of toothpaste and got an integrity officer whose voice sounded exactly like a neat desk. She was just confirming that I'd received the copy of their notice and asking whether I would be willing to provide a formal statement. And also, this was said with that same lightness people use when they hand you a heavy bag, whether I was in possession of any materials he might have given me for context. I pictured the USB in its Ziploc like a tiny fish at a school fair. I said yes. 30 minutes later I was in a windowless office that smelled like new carpet and dry erase markers, watching a woman in a navy cardigan scan the bag with the kind of grave care usually reserved for ceremonial sorts. She slid it into a manila envelope, wrote the date and time, and said it would go to their tech team. I felt bizarrely proud of past me for playing chain of custody. I thought that would be my daily ration of adulthood, but apparently I was on the tasting menu. At 10, a detective from local police called. His name was one syllable longer than it should have been, and he had a way of not filling silences that made you tell the whole story without invitation. He said the university had made a report and would I like to attach my own, since my name and photo were involved. I said yes before my lizard brain could talk me out of it. The station had those faded recruitment posters that make everyone look like they love paperwork, and a kid's corner with 2 missing puzzle pieces you could tell had been missing for a decade. He took my statement in longhand, pen scratching, and when I pulled the second Ziploc out of my tote his eyebrows did this small, pleased climb. "You've been watching good television," he said, and then evened it out with a cough like he hadn't made a joke. He didn't open it, he just stapled my contact slip to the envelope and wrote my name in block capitals like a teacher marking a field trip permission form. By lunch, the uni's tech team had apparently had their fun, because Navy Cardigan emailed to say that, among other things, the USB contained a folder labeled Evidence, Final. Inside were voice memos of him practicing calls in a kind voice that was almost him but not quite, "Hi, just circling back, and it would really mean a lot," and a PDF called Referee Kit, V7 that had my headshot pasted into a template with instructions in red like theater directions. "Smile here, mention probity. If they ask dates, say varied." There was also a spreadsheet hilariously titled Ops Plan with columns for target, alibi, backup story, and notes, which would have been funny if one of the rows hadn't had my name in it, and the note, "Will fold if pressured, appeal to future." I read that sitting cross-legged on the floor of a staff room that contains exactly 2 stools for 12 bodies and felt something hot and bored climb up my spine. I wrote back to Navy Cardigan that I was available to attend any hearing if needed and then ate a banana like it might bite me first. 2 days later, they asked me to log into a panel session as a witness. I took the call from an unused tutorial room with a wobbly table and an ancient poster explaining proper hand-washing technique like it was a lost art. The panel were 3 rectangles with composed faces and one off-screen cough. He dialed in from a car, seatbelt slashed across his chest like a sash, sunlight too bright on his cheek so he kept wincing as if the truth itself was glaring at him. He launched into a speech about systems and gatekeepers and at one point actually used the phrase letter of the law in a way that would have been on brand if he'd known how brands work. They asked me 2 questions. Did I author the documents? No. Did I authorize my name, image, or institutional affiliation to be used? No. My voice sounded flat and sensible, like a good shoe. He tried to speak over the last word like he could catch it and stuff it back in my mouth. The chair, a tidy woman with a plant visible over her left shoulder, said, "Sweet as tea, you will have your chance." He did. He said he'd intended to make it true. He said he was under pressure. He said, twice, that he was sorry if any distress had been caused. The if landed like a dropped fork. They thanked him and explained procedure with that funereal calm institutions learn for a living. When the call ended, my reflection in the black screen looked like someone who had finally sat down after standing in the wrong queue for a year. I was on an early shift the next morning and had just finished getting a woman's hair into a plate that made her smile like a schoolgirl when Ed called up needing a runner for a patient transfer. I took the lift and the little electric beds and beeps elevator music made my teeth feel philosophical. The Ed doors opened and the first thing I saw was a leg strapped into a splint and a pair of running shoes muddy up to the ankles. Then I saw the face they were attached to. He'd rolled it, a clean, angry balloon of swelling around the lateral malleolus that made one of the junior doctors whistle small sympathy. He clocked me and his mouth did this shape that used to mean my name. The attending didn't miss a beat. "Conflict?" she asked me, the one-word test with 100 good answers. I said, yes, and swapped with another student like passing a hot pan. He tried to sit up, started, "Can we?" And the nurse with the best poker face I have ever witnessed said, "Not appropriate, friend," in a tone she must save for drunk uncles and exes in hairnets. I stepped behind the curtain of professional boundaries and watched the light on the patient monitor make slow green little mountains and thought, not unkindly, that pain is sometimes the only clean language. He must have been discharged with crutches, because at 9 that night my cheap stick-on camera pinged. The grainy app video showed a man on one crutch at the bottom of my stairs, looking up at my door like it had personally betrayed him. He didn't try the handle. He stood for a full 40 seconds, my camera puts the timestamp right there like a tiny vanity number on a race bib, and then he turned and lopsidedly clattered away. I saved the clip and emailed it to Detective More syllables with a subject line so boring it felt like power. He wrote back received, "Thanks faster than I've ever seen law enforcement type." I thought maybe the ankle would buy me a fortnight of peace, but paperwork is endurance sport and he is nothing if not committed to training. A property manager from a different agency called to touch base about another rental application that had me down as a long-term landlord. He read my reference in a careful monotone as if each word might explode. I told him, pleasantly, that I am not and have never been a landlord, unless you count babysitting succulents. He made a noise like a chair scraping back and said he would be updating their notes. An hour after that, Navy Cardigan forwarded me a courtesy copy of his 30-page submission to the panel. I did not intend to read it, but apparently curiosity is a muscle and mine had a protein shake. It was an essay interleaving half-true biographical paragraphs with screenshots of late-night messages to no one in particular and, inexplicably, a JPEG of my nursing school logo cropped so tight it looked like an abstract painting. On page 19, there was a paragraph about me in which I was described as someone who has lost faith in institutions, which made me laugh out loud alone in our kitchen with a tea towel over one shoulder like a tiny cape. My housemate asked what was funny and I said, "Apparently I'm a symbol now," and she said, "You always were," and slid me a spoonful of her sauce to taste in a way that felt like being reinitiated into a sane cult. His mother texted to say the police had been by to clarify some matters and that he was furious with her because she didn't lie for him. I typed and deleted I don't know how many versions of "you don't owe him anything" and landed on a neutral, "I'm sorry this is hard." She replied with a photo of their dog asleep under the dining table in a patch of sun like a dropped pie. There was one more ridiculous coda. The station called to say they'd like me to sign a formal complaint so they could attach it to the file without having to chase me later. The front desk officer had a tiny pink pen stuck into her bun like a pickaxe and she made my signature feel like a practical magic trick. On my way out, the detective leaned out of a doorway and said, not unkindly, "You did the right thing." It didn't feel like right or wrong. It felt like taking your hand off a hot plate that everyone has been insisting is room temperature. I am, incidentally, getting very good at losing at cards. My housemate and I graduated from gin rummy to cribbage, which involves pegs and numbers in a way that should have made my brain try to climb out my ear, and yet every 15 minutes we both clap, like seals at some obscure combination called his knobs, and the world makes a tiny amount of sense. On Tuesday, my placement preceptor let me tie the perfect sling and the woman in its side like an elevator arriving. The plant that used to live on his windowsill is now shameless. It has put out 2 new leaves and a third is unspooling like a ribbon you pull that just keeps coming. I told it, conversationally, that it was showing off. It's allowed. So am I. Today, the panel's decision arrived in the same careful language as before. They were not satisfied as to the accuracy and integrity of his materials. His application was declined. The matter was referred to his previous institution for conduct review. The police would continue to liaise. It was all verbs with their sleeves rolled down. I put the letter next to the pebble on the windowsill and looked at both of them until my shoulders came down from around my ears. My camera blinked at the door and showed me nothing but a neighbor's kid in a superhero cape doing 3 solemn laps of our landing as if protecting us all by ordinance. My phone stayed quiet. I made soup and didn't burn the onions and ate it on the floor because the chairs were covered in laundry, and not one part of it felt like a test. I am not a logo. I am not a plot device. I am an organism with a bus timetable and a decent pen, and I am cultivating the deeply unfashionable skill of being ordinary on purpose. The rest, crutches, submissions, car seat soliloquies, can live where they belong, in other people's inboxes, not my chest.